double what it is today if we don't change our ways and make some adjustments. Another number, 30%. Anybody here hear about the pension crisis? We all know what the pension crisis is. 30% represents the number that your property tax is likely to increase just due to the pension crisis alone. A little bit of history on that. This is a problem that's gone all the way back to the Ridge administration when the legislature decided to give itself a 50% increase in the pension. They gave a 25% increase retroactively to all the state workers and teachers. Subsequent to that, they decided to underfund the pension system, and then along came the 2008 stock market crash, and today we find ourselves in a $50 billion hole just for the pension system alone. You pay for that through your property taxes. 30%, interestingly enough, is also the percentage of total wages that your school now contributes to, or is close to 30%, it's going up to 30%, to the pension fund. In other words, if you take your school's entire wages, add another 30% to that, and that is now their pension obligation. A healthy pension fund, you should be at about a 4 to 7% contribution rate. We're currently at about 26 to 27%, on our way up to 30%. And it stays that high all the way out to the year 2036. And that's assuming we don't have any more stock market crashes or any rough road in between now and then. This is an extremely serious problem. The next number, 10,000. 10,000 is the number of people who lose their homes to a tax sale every year in the state of Pennsylvania. This is not foreclosures. This is share of tax sales. 10,000 folks every year. About 2 years ago, there was a public meeting in the Senate, and all the lobbyists that were for and against SB 76 showed up. One such lobby group that is against the bill is called the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center, during which a man named Michael Wood, who was representing them, was making testimony, and he said on the Senate in this hearing that 10,000 people every year losing their homes in Pennsylvania is not a significant enough number to change the way we fund public education. And I don't know how you feel about that statement, but as far as I'm concerned, one person losing their home to any kind of tax, to me, is a tragedy, and that's reason enough to change the way we do business. So education finance reform, an overview. Myth number one, property taxes are the problem. Actually, I didn't make this slide. I actually disagree with this particular slide. To me, I think property taxes are the problem because they are what enable all these problems to take place. But the creator of this slide, what he meant by this was that your high property taxes that you're seeing today are the result of a lot of other underlying problems, and we're going to look at those right now. First thing there, property taxes are an antiquated taxation system not based on accepted taxation principles. What does that mean? Well, antiquated taxation system, centuries ago, before there was an IRS and before the government knew you didn't file tax forms, they didn't know how much money you made. So the best system they could come up with was, well, they would tax your land, just assuming that if you were somebody who owned 40 acres, you might be a little more wealthy than somebody who earned 20 acres. And it was also back in the days that we were an agrarian society and a lot of people earned their living off the land. So it might have made sense at that point in time. Today, your homes don't generate revenue. And today, you also don't, it's not based on any type of ability to pay. Your home does not generate revenue, and it's certainly not a reflection of your wealth. In fact, if you look at a property tax bill of, say, a middle class or a lower class working homeowner, and you put his property tax bill and reflect that as a percentage of his income, you're probably going to find that they're paying a much higher percentage of their income towards property taxes than would be a wealthy person. True, maybe a wealthy person might live in a nice home paying, say, $10,000 a year in property taxes, but if you reflect that against his income, really he's paying probably a much lower percentage of his income towards property taxes. So the property tax is extremely regressive. In fact, it's the most aggressive tax that we have. Not based on accepted taxation principles. Again, the property tax is in no way, shape, or form based on your ability to pay. It's based on an arbitrary assessed value to your home. Very next line there says that property taxes are inherently arbitrary and unfair. Home assessments are obviously very inaccurate at times. Again, it's not based on how much you make, it's not based on how much you consume, it's simply based on whatever the county decided your home was worth at the time of the last countywide reassessment. Inability to pay property tax bill results in a loss of your home. If you have a loss of income, your income goes down, you fall in hard times, your property tax bill, as you know, is still there. The income tax, on the other hand, if you lose your income, you pay no income tax. If your income goes down, you might spend less in the marketplace, so you would end up paying less in sales tax. So the income tax and the sales tax is a much better way of taxation, simply because it's more reflective of your ability to pay, where the property tax certainly is not. And again, if you can't pay, you either have to sell your home or the sheriff's going to come knocking and kick you out. Out of control spending. We have two people to blame here for out of control spending. One might be your local school board. The next might be Harrisburg. We all know that there's some spendthrift school districts out there building these Taj Mahal schools. Then sometimes what happens is the neighboring school district says, hey, look what they did, we got to keep up with the Joneses, now they might do it. You all probably have some examples that you could give there, you could relate to school boards maybe spending a little bit more than they should. But it's not all school boards, it's also Harrisburg. Harrisburg sends a lot of unfunded mandates down to schools. They say, here, you have to do X, Y, and Z, but we're not going to pay for it. You're going to have to raise property taxes in order to fund these unfunded mandates. That's another problem, and the pension is just another reflection of that. They caused the pension problem, and they passed the buck right down to your local school and said, you need to raise property taxes to keep funding this pension issue. Lack of effective education cost control. To date, there has been nothing effective at controlling the cost of public education. Act 1 of 2006 was supposed to be the big plan that was going to take care of this problem. And the way it was going to take care of this problem was the state decided, well, we're going to issue an index every single year. This past year was 1.7%. And they said the schools can raise their taxes up to that index. But if they go over that index, they need to put it out to a voter referendum. And they have to ask the taxpayers whether or not they can raise taxes beyond the index. Well, it all sounds great, except they made exceptions to the referendum. They also included 3 exceptions and said, well, you don't have to go to the voters and ask permission for these 3 particular items. You can skirt the referendum, you can file for an exception, and the state will decide whether or not you can raise taxes beyond the index. Those exceptions were grandfather debt, special education, and the pensions. 3 of the biggest cost drivers that we have today, in fact, the pension are the biggest cost drivers in increased property taxes. So, the results are about 40% of the school districts every year in the state of Pennsylvania file for these exceptions, and every year, every single one of them, without fail, are granted the exceptions to raise your taxes beyond the index. Now, maybe your particular school did or did not, I don't know, I didn't look into all of your school's data. But just so you know, Act 1 had made no impact on curtailing spending whatsoever. So that was one method that the legislature tried to enact that has failed. I already touched on taxation inequities. The projected cost of education there. To see where we're going forward, let's take a look at the past and see where we came from. Now this chart, I don't know if you can all see it, I'll explain it to you. This chart came from an independent fiscal office review of SB 76. The Independent Fiscal Office is a nonpartisan group who takes different legislation, looks at it from a financial standpoint, and in this case, they looked at it to see, will this bill work? And in doing so, they came up with this particular chart. This chart shows at the top, if you can read that, it says cumulative growth in property taxes, average weekly wage, and CPI over time. CPI is the Consumer Price Index. It's basically a measure of inflation. That top line that you see there, that top black line that's shooting up into the sky, that is the rate that your property taxes statewide have increased on average over the time frame from 1993 to 2013. During that 20-year time frame, property taxes have increased by 146%. While at the same time, that bottom line that you see there, That's the CPI, that's inflation. Over that same time period, inflation has only gone up 59%. And the middle line, the most important line, is your average weekly wage increases. Basically, that's the rate that your wages have increased. They have gone up 80% over that same time frame. So what we see here is your school property taxes have been outpacing your wages and your raises by almost a 2-to-1 margin. Obviously, we have some issues to deal with. So the short answer is, we have an irreparably broken K-12 public education finance system. The property tax is a failure, and it's going to cause even more problems in the future. It cannot be fixed. It must be dealt with in some other way. So here's myth number 2. Property tax relief or property tax reform is the solution. They are not the solution. So let's take a look at what's wrong with property tax relief. Well, the first line there, Act 50, 72, Act 1, HB 1600, they were all attempts to address this problem. All of them were attempts to shift from your property taxes to an earned income tax. The problem is, it just didn't work. Act 50 and Act 72, that was left up to the school boards to decide whether or not to shift from property taxes to an earned income tax. Most of the school boards across the state declined to do that. Once they declined to do that, Governor Rendell at the time said, well, let's put this out to the voters. Since the school boards voted it down, let's let the voters decide. So they put it out. 498 school districts were eligible for this shift. 494 of them rejected it. Governor Rendell, after that happened, said, well, the voters were stupid for rejecting this. No, the voters were not stupid, and neither were the school boards. The voters and the school boards both realized that any shift from the property tax to any other tax without eliminating or permanently capping the property tax is only going to result in the property tax continuing to rise right back to where you were before, and it's going to continue on past where you were. Plus now you have these new taxes on top of it to pay in addition. So really, those acts were nothing more than tax increases when you looked at the details. HB 1600 was another attempt. That bill was going to raise the income tax 0.5% and then 0.25% on the sales tax, and all you would have gotten for that was about a $400 discount off your property taxes. Wouldn't have been eliminated, wouldn't have even been capped. How long was it going to take for your property taxes to go up $400 and keep on sailing, and now you have the extra taxes to pay on top? That didn't go anywhere. Then along came HB 1189, the Optional Property Tax Elimination Act. Well, this tax attempted to shift property taxes to businesses through 3 different taxes. One was a mercantile tax, one was a business privilege tax, and I forget the third. But basically it was an attempt to shift away from the property tax and pretty much dump it all on your local businesses. Well, if you live in a rural school district and you don't have a whole lot of tax base for businesses, this bill does nothing for you. And let's say you do have a bunch of businesses. Can you really shift enough of the property tax burden to your local businesses to make a significant impact on your overall tax bill? I would say not, and I would say even if you could, are the businesses going to stay there? I mean, or would they end up packing up and moving somewhere that's a little more friendly for businesses? That bill ended up dying in the Senate and didn't go anywhere. Act 1 rebates. We all know about the gambling revenue. The property tax was back then, like it is now, a hot issue. Property tax was used as the carrot on the stick to try and bring gambling into the state of Pennsylvania. Everybody bit, and as we know now, it resulted in basically nothing. I don't know what your homestead, farmstead rebates are, $100, maybe $2 if you're lucky, $75. It was basically worthless. Then along comes the current governor with the Wolf Plan. You might have heard about his proposal. His proposal, he looked at 76 and said, well, that's a great idea. I'd like to raise the income tax and the sales tax, which he did. Sales income from 3.07 to 3.7 under his plan, the sales tax from 6 to 6.6%, and that would have generated about $8 billion. The problem with Wolf's plan is that he was only going to give back $3.6 billion of that $8 billion that he generated from increasing your other taxes to property tax relief. He was out there claiming it would have given you a 50% reduction. Well, it takes $12.7 billion to completely eliminate the school property tax in the state of Pennsylvania. 12.7. 3.7 or 3.6, no matter what math you use, is not half of 12.7. So on its face, Obviously, it was not going to give you a 50% tax reduction. And what's worse is the money that did go back to property tax reduction was driven out on a formula that he came up with, so the government would be in control of which school districts got how much money. The Pennsylvania Department of Education put out a spreadsheet looking at every school district in the state and figured out how much each district would get if Wolf's property tax plan were enacted. And on each end of the spectrum, we have the Morris School District in Butler County would have gotten a 15% reduction, that's all, 15%. Whereas the Green School District in Greene County would have gotten 306%. They would have gotten triple the money back than they're currently paying in property taxes. Further analysis showed that 404 out of 500 school districts would end up paying more under the Wolf plan in total taxes than they do today. That's 81% would have been paying more. So his plan was nothing more than a redistribution of wealth scheme. Any property tax relief plan, you see here, is doomed to failure if the system is not restructured. And that's why we are not asking, we are demanding from our legislature, we want no more relief bills, we want no more reform bills, we want no more reduction bills. We want the property tax, school property tax replaced. You can see here, this guy, they put this in here sort of as a joke, but really it's not a joke. This issue has been at the forefront for about 30 years, especially the past 10 years in particular, with attempts to eliminate the property tax via some sort of method similar to this. We're at the point now where we're sick of the excuses, we're sick of the worthless bills that keep coming before the legislature. We want to get serious because now is the time for serious change. Now, why is now the time for serious change? Well, obviously the rising homeowner discontent, you're probably here because you're discontent as well. With the chart that I showed you at the beginning with how property taxes are outpacing our ability to pay, it's no wonder people are really fed up and they want to see some kind of action on this topic. One thing that we have heard time and time again as excuses is that property taxes are a regional problem and not all areas of the state have a property tax problem. Well, I found that that's not true. I found that it ranges from being a problem to being an extreme problem. That's the range of problems across the state. We have gone door to door from the eastern part of the state to about 3/4 of the way to the western part of the state. We haven't gotten out to the complete west end yet. But I can tell you that we show up in areas that claim that property taxes aren't a problem, and the homeowners tell a completely different story. One example I'll give you is Senator Wozniak's area out by Johnstown. We went out to his hometown knocking on doors. I mean, when I say his hometown, I'm talking about his door too, and his neighbors. He lives in Westmont out there. We heard this rhetoric from his staff. Property taxes aren't a problem out here, so we're driving out thinking, we wasting time, maybe they're not a problem. Maybe people aren't upset. Well, what we found is house after house after house after house up for sale. We talked to homeowners who lived in modest homes, 1,000 square foot, 1,200 square foot, nice homes, but very modest, on maybe a quarter acre in a neighborhood, and their school property tax bills are $3,500 to $4,000. And they're saying, who's saying property taxes aren't a problem? We knocked on Senator Wozniak's neighbor's door, spoke to her. She knew him, she called him John by his first name. And we said, well, Senator Wozniak says property taxes aren't a problem here. And she said, why in the world would John say such a thing? I said, I don't know, would you please call and ask her that, please? Well, his constituents ended up putting a lot of pressure on him. And we did have one vote in the Senate last session in the Finance Committee, and we swung him from a no vote to a yes vote, simply by going door to door. So the point is, they're a problem everywhere. They're just varying levels of being a problem across the state. I already talked about the Act 50, Act 72, Act 1 failures, especially the gambling revenue, pressure from taxpayer groups. One of them, there's 84 of us total under the PCTA banner that are supporting this bill. As I just told you, we're going door to door, we're doing town halls, we're doing presentations like this, and we're sending flyers into targeted areas, and it's having an effect. The legislators are finally starting to take notice and starting to take us a little bit more seriously. This next item is extremely important: diminishing opportunity to fund property tax replacement from a state level source. If this bill doesn't pass soon, it's going to get to the point in the next few years that it's not going to be a possibility. And I'm going to go back and give you a little history. Back in 2004, Representative Rohr had a similar plan. It was a property tax elimination plan. It was a little different than this one today. But back then, he needed about $8 billion to completely replace the school property tax. His plan could have done it with just an expanded sales tax. An expanded sales tax, no increase to the income tax, and they would have actually lowered the sales tax from 6% to 4.25%. No income tax increase, lower the sales tax, just expand it to more items. And you could have completely replaced your property taxes back then, and the legislature decided it wasn't a good idea and they didn't do it. So here we are today. Now we need to come up with about $12.7 billion, and we need to raise the sales tax, expand it, and also raise the income tax. But even so, you're going to see that this is still a great bill. It's still a fantastic opportunity for the homeowner. But the point here is we need to get moving on this soon, because as our school spending keeps rising, as you saw in that first chart, we're going to get to the point where sales tax and income tax are going to have to get driven up so high to replace it. If we don't do it soon, you're never going to see the legislature do it. So that's part of the reason that we're really putting on a full court press right now. In July 2014, the Arizona State University job growth rating for Pennsylvania put us at 36th out of 50. 36th out of 50 at a rate of 1.19. That's pretty horrible. Same year, the United Van Lines National Mover Study, you know, the moving group, they did a study of in-migration and out-migration of the 50 states. Pennsylvania ranked 9th in out-migration, meaning that there were only 8 states that had people fleeing from it faster than they were fleeing from Pennsylvania. Obviously, that's not a good sign. There's 43.2% inbound, but 56%, 56.8% outbound. That means that we're losing taxpayers. That means that as we lose taxpayers, that burden is shifting to the rest of us who remain in the state. Now, why are they fleeing? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but the tax burden is a big one. Taxes are too high, and as you see above there, we're only 36th out of 50 for job growth ranking. They can't find work. A lot of people leaving are young people. They go to college. We subsidize some of their college education with some of our universities. They're subsidized from the state, only to have them leave, go somewhere else, and we get no return on money. We are currently 10th highest in tax burden in the country. Our income tax is very low. If you look at any study of taxes in the 50 states, everyone will point to our low 3.07 income tax. It's pretty much the only bright spot in Pennsylvania. So our being ranked 10th isn't because of our income tax, and it's not because of our 6% sales tax, because that's pretty much in line with most other states. It's because of the property tax. It's because of the property tax and because of the business tax. That's why we need to take a look at this tax and do something about it. It's just more proof. Tax Foundation Location Matters is a comparative analysis of state tax costs on businesses report for Pennsylvania. It found that we are 49th out of 50 for new firms, new businesses coming to the state. 49th out of 50. And we're 50th of 50 for retaining mature established firms. Again, it's just more proof. Folks, unfortunately, don't want to do business in Pennsylvania, and there's a good reason for it. It's high property taxes, and it's a high business tax. So the bottom line is runaway property taxes are destroying Pennsylvania's economy, devastating job-producing small businesses, and driving away its residents. Now, what is the legislature's answer to this? Well, we'll give them KOZs. Everybody hear about a KOZ? You know what a KOZ is? It's called a Keystone Opportunity Zone. They will target an area and say, well, to businesses, if you move in here, we'll give you, I think it's a 10-year tax-free abatement as an incentive to bring you in. And local school districts do the same thing as do counties with the LERS. It's just another form of a tax incentive to try and draw businesses in. Now, this proves that property taxes are a problem. If you have to give an incentive to bring businesses into the state, it proves that we have a property tax problem. And it produces more problems. The promises are, well, we'll bring these businesses in, it'll create jobs, 10 years down the road, when they come out of this KOZ, we're going to have all this extra money to spend in the schools. Well, sometimes at the end of that KOZ, the businesses might leave. Or sometimes at the end of that KOZ, they might appeal their assessment and the school doesn't get anywhere near the money they were counting on getting after having subsidized them for the past 10 years, you know, the other taxpayers. Or what ends up happening is maybe this plan does work and the school gets a ton of new money. Do you think the school is going to then give that money back to you via tax cut after you were so generous to allow the company to move in and not pay taxes in your school district for 10 years? No. They're probably going to spend it, and they're probably going to create more recurring costs, which is going to drive up your taxes. Again, you never see a benefit from it in most cases. Not to mention that you're giving incentives to outside businesses to come in and compete against maybe hometown people that have been established in your districts for years, and now you're giving their competition an unfair advantage. KOZs and LRTAs are a problem. We say, if they work, let's make the entire state a KOZ. Let's eliminate property taxes for everybody, not just some people. So here's the solution. Replace the school property tax with a more broad-based, equitable funding stream. Enter House Bill, Senate Bill 76. So here are the goals of the bill. Total elimination of the school property taxes. It's going to be phased in over a 2-year period. The first 2-year period, we established what's called the Education Stabilization Fund. Money is driven into that fund, and then in the 3rd year, it's driven back out and replaces your school property taxes. Now, this also would eliminate the ability of your school board to raise your taxes. The property tax goes away, but there are specific exceptions to that, and I'm going to get to those in a minute. Don't worry, you're not going to be scared of it. You're going to like it. Stabilization of school funding. One of the common objections we hear is, well, the property tax is a stable form of funding, therefore we can't get rid of it. Sales tax and income taxes aren't stable. If you have an economic downturn, then the funding lowers. Well, I'm going to ask you, who exactly is the property tax stable for? Is it stable for you, the homeowner, as it keeps rising at the rate that it has been? I would say no. And I would also say it's not a stable form of funding for the schools either, and I'll give you one example. GlaxoSmithKline in the Upper Marion School District a couple of years ago appealed their assessment, went to the courts. It was about a 2-year appeal, and at the end of it, they were issued a $2 million property tax reduction. $2 million. So now the school has $2 million less to spend just from one appeal. This happens all the time. Jerry, you can probably back me up on that. Businesses do this on a regular basis. They appeal their taxes to a lower assessed value. Now, do you think that school, after having a $2 million hit, says, well, we're just going to have to adjust our budget down $2 million? Of course not. You guys make it all up. If it happens in your district, they just raise everybody else's taxes to make up the lost $2 million. I don't call that stable. Also, historically, the income tax and the sales tax both have outpaced inflation. So they're actually a lot more stable than many people will lead you to believe. Establish realistic limits on increases in K-12 education spending. As I told you before, Act 1 was a failure. There are currently no limitations whatsoever, as is proven by the first chart that I keep referring to. SB 76 does enact spending limits, and I'm going to get to that in just a little bit. The revenue. The elimination tax swap under 76 must be tax neutral. This bill does not generate any revenue to go into the general fund for any other projects. This is a dollar-for-dollar replacement of your property tax. That's the only goal of the bill. That's all it does. It does not grow government programs in any other way, shape, or form, unlike some of the other plans like Governor Wolf's plan. So how does it do it? It does it through an increase to the sales tax from 6 to 7%. It does it from an increase to the state personal income tax rate to 4.34. It's now at 3.07, so you're talking about a 1.27% increase on your income tax, about a penny and a quarter on the dollar. And it also expands the sales tax to some items and services that are currently untaxed. Now, Pennsylvania has the lowest base of sales tax in the country. In other words, there are a lot of exemptions to the sales tax on services and products in the state of Pennsylvania, more than any other state. We're going to put the sales tax on some of those items and services and use that money to eliminate your school property tax, but there will still be some tax-exempt items. For instance, medical dental procedures still remain untaxed. Fresh fruits, meats, and dairy, all still untaxed. Heating oil, public transportation, prescription drugs, and some items of clothing, all still remain untaxed under SB 76. Now, one thing that's important for you to remember when you have so many items that are not subject to the sales tax currently, politicians just salivate over trying to apply a tax to them. Ed Rendell, at the end of his term, actually took all these items right from 76 and tried to apply the sales tax to them, but he didn't want to give you any kind of property tax relief or elimination. He just wanted to put all that money into the general fund for Harrisburg to spend. Governor Wolf has his eye on it too. He's been trying the same thing. So my point here is that we need to realize at some point those items are going to become taxed. They are going to become subject to the sales tax. One way, shape, or form, it will happen. We want to do it now and give all that money back to you in the form of property tax elimination before somebody else does it and just grows government and increases your taxes without giving it back to you. So those are pretty much the way we view it. You have two choices. It's going to happen at some point. Let's do it now for SB 76. Act 1 gambling revenue doesn't amount to much. It's about $800 million a year. We talked about that earlier, but it is there for property tax reduction, so we throw that back in. That will stay used for property tax elimination under SB 76. And here, small retained property tax for long-term debt. Here's another item that some legislators will say, if you call them up and tell them you want to see this bill passed, they're going to say, hey, wait a minute. They're not eliminating your school property tax. There's still a property tax in place for long-term debt. Yes, there is, and let me explain why. There were a lot of legislators and people who had a major objection to 76 because they might have had a frugal school district, or they lived in a frugal school district that had little to no debt, whereas maybe the school down the road was spending like crazy, building new buildings, building this, doing that, and had a lot of debt. And they said, why should I subsidize that school's debt with my increased sales tax and personal income tax? We would have been better off going into debt too if this were the case, because then the state would be paying off our debt. We thought that made a lot of sense. And it also helped us because we didn't have to raise the money through the income and sales tax to cover every school district's debt. So what we did was we said, okay, we are going to retain a small property tax after 76 passes to pay off every school district's debt. In other words, if you created the debt, you're still responsible for it. But once that debt's paid off, then your property tax goes away 100%. But the school, in the meantime, can increase the debt, and they can extend the term of the debt. On average, across the state, they're looking at about 10% of the school's expenditures go to debt service. So that roughly translates into a 90% reduction in your property taxes after 76 is enacted. Once your long-term debt is paid off, being whatever that is, varies school district to school district, might be 5 years, might be 1 year, might be 10 years. After that point in time, your property taxes go away 100%, your school property taxes under SB 76. All property tax replacement revenue to be placed in an education stabilization fund, a segregated lockbox account. This revenue does not go into the general fund. Some legislators are trying to scare you, saying, you're going to send your money to Harrisburg